I'm no one special, but it's a shame that this program isn't broadcast on every radio station across the nation. The country needs it. The world needs it. And that's largely because the media has become so inept, so moronic, so disingenuous. Well, this program, as you know, is devoted to the most important and fastest growing segment of society, to those of you who are leaving your religious and political affiliations, who have come to know that the world's political, religious, military, economic, academic, and media institutions are corrupt, that they are counterproductive, every one of them, and that they cannot be fixed. Our mission, therefore, is to know who is working against our interest, to understand how and why they're doing so. Because exposing and condemning such schemes isn't hateful. It's the single most caring and appropriate thing that we can do. In our concluding hour today, we're going to continue to use evidence and reason to explore Paul's letter to the Galatians, called Galatians. We're going to compare it to Yahowah's Torah, and we're going to systematically prove, beyond any doubt, that its author, Paul, the author of half of the Christian New Testament, was a liar and should not be trusted. Now, if you would like to join in and participate in any of those topics, recognizing that we're going to begin with Boko Haram, where we left off yesterday in the news hour, and then we're going to assail a Muslim academic. You can do so by calling toll-free, 877-300-7645. Yesterday we ended by talking about an article that was presenting many reasons that the world should care about what Boko Haram is doing. They have, it goes on to say that what the Boko Haram has set out to do in Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria, is heinous. As they say it's as heinous as the havoc the Taliban is wreaking across Afghanistan and Pakistan. But this quote from Peter Bergen, who is often an Islamic apologist, he said they actually originated as a group called the Nigerian Taliban, which kind of explains where they're coming from. Said CNN's National Security Analyst Peter Bergen, they are aiming to impose Taliban-style rule on much of Nigeria, particularly in the north, where they are based, end quote. What a pathetic piece of worm rot Peter Bergen is. The Taliban does not explain where Boko Haram is coming from. The Quran does. Muhammad does. You can read the Quran and Hadith and study Sharia law, and you will know exactly where they're coming from. They're coming from Islam. They're not coming from the Taliban. They're not trying to impose Taliban-style rule. There is no Taliban-style rule. The Taliban were identical to Boko Haram in the sense that both are fundamentalist Islamic terrorist organizations. That's what they are. They are similar only because they are both Islamic. Their style of governance is the same because they all impose and refer to Sharia law, which is based entirely on the words and deeds of Muhammad, as they are recorded in the Hadith primarily and secondarily in the Quran. And Muhammad, as he is depicted in the Islamic sources, the only Islamic sources, was a rapist, a kidnapper, someone who sold people for ransom. He was engaged in the slave trade. He was a ruthless murderer. Boko Haram is following in Muhammad's footsteps. That's a fact. Boko Haram is listening to what Allah told Muslims through his Quran. That is undeniable. Peter Bergen there. Related to the Taliban in the sense that explains where they're coming from and they're trying to impose Taliban-style rule. We lost our ever-loving minds? You pretend to be an expert, and yet that's the best you can come up with? The group's name means Western education is sinful in the local Hausa language. That's not exactly what it means, but it's close enough. Its aim is to impose stricter enforcement of Sharia law. A stricter enforcement. I mean, Sharia law is the most savage, the most uncivilized, the most sexist, the most depraved legal code ever conceived. There is no such thing as a softer form of Sharia. You know, this is the at the end of strict says that it's a comparison. There is no mild and nice form of Sharia law. There is no easygoing and how are you doing today? I hope you're having a nice day. Mr. Rogers' version of Sharia law. Sharia law is based in its entirely, without exception, on Muhammad's words and deeds, as they are chronicled in the Quran and Hadith. Period. End of conversation. And what do the Quran and Hadith have to say about Muhammad? He led 75 terrorist raids in the first 10 years of the Islamic era. He financed Islam based upon the slave trade and kidnapping and piracy. He was a pedophile. Muhammad was a rapist. All the kinds of behaviors that we're witnessing with Boko Haram are the behaviors that Muhammad himself participated in, the behaviors that Muhammad glorified and that the Quran approves. That's the reality. The group especially opposes the education of women. Why? Because the Quran says that women are useless. Because in the Hadith, Muhammad says that women are stupid, that they have no rights, that they exist purely for the pleasure of men, and not their persona, just their physical bodies. Why would you need to educate a woman if her entire place in Islamic society is as a sex object? That's why they oppose education of women. Then it goes on to say, under its version of Sharia law, there are no versions. There really are no versions. Sharia law is based entirely on the Hadith and Quran. There are 4 early sources of Hadith. Actually 5, because the Quran itself is Hadith. Yes, the Quran is Hadith because Hadith are all reports from Muhammad and his companions. The Quran is an oral report from Muhammad and his companions. Those sources are, the first compiled was Ibn Ishaq. It is a collection of hadith put in chronological order that pertain to Muhammad, and therefore it's called the Sirah, or biography of Muhammad. Then there is the Tariq. The Tariq is the history of Islam's formation. It is another chronological collection of hadith. These all reports from Muhammad and his companions. And then there were 2 topical arrangements of hadith that were written within 200 years of Muhammad's death, compiled within 200 years would be more correct. And they are by Bukhari and Muslim. That and the Quran are the only 5 sources that tell us anything about who Muhammad was, who Allah is, how the Quran came into being, and how Islam is to be interpreted. There are no other sources other than those 5 written within 250 years of Muhammad's death. And that's it, folks. And it is based entirely on those sources that Sharia law is comprised. That means that there isn't one version versus another version. There is simply the Hadith and the Quran, one Muhammad, and what we know about him. It is a set of laws based upon the most repulsive person who ever lived. That's the reality. And you don't cherry pick the worst of Islamic terrorism verses from a sea of peaceful verses to come to that conclusion. The Quran and the Hadith are overwhelmingly repulsive. Morally repulsive, vicious, fixated on the worst of human behavior. And as we shall see in an article that was written by CNN regarding an Islamic apologist, for him to create even the hint that there was something noble and good in Islam, he had to remove his citations from their context, quote only a portion of a verse, when its context and the remainder of the verse is grotesquely immoral and ruthless. It is time that we just tell it like it is. I know we live in a world of cowards. I know we live in a world of corruption, of people who are afraid to tell the truth, of people who don't even know the truth. But folks, it's time to stop pretending. It says, under its version of Sharia law, women should be at home raising children, looking after their husbands, not at school, learning to read and write. No, the women should be at home as sex slaves. That's what the Quran says. The Quran doesn't give women the duty, responsibility of raising children. No, the Quran only presents women as objects to be owned and manipulated by men. And this is not a version of Sharia. This is the edicts and words and deeds of Muhammad, Islam's lone founder. Then consider its ties to al-Qaeda, this article goes on to say. Then it says, oh, well, how closely related Boko Haram is to al-Qaeda is hard to define. But the United States says it has links. It has no connection whatsoever to al-Qaeda. The United States is just fixated on al-Qaeda because it serves as a way to deflect attention away from the reality that all Islamic terrorism is motivated by Islam. But by using this al-Qaeda name, the base, they create a fictitious foe. There is no association between Boko Haram and al-Qaeda. They have an affinity. You can go to what motivates both of them. They are both Islamic. Yes, the United States would have you believe, quote, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which is the North African al-Qaeda affiliate, has given money to Boko Haram in the past, Bergen said. There is reporting suggesting that Osama bin Laden was in communication with the leadership of the group. Well, let me give you the truth. Osama bin Laden was in communication, all right, with the Islamic State of Iraq, with al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula, and also with al-Qaeda of the Maghreb, which is in the Sahara of northern Africa. It was a one-way communication. They didn't respond to him. Osama bin Laden wrote to them. And what he says is, I want no affiliation with you. I am disgusted by what you're doing. I have nothing to do with you whatsoever. I guess that is correspondence. So, well, Peter Bergen's right. They did have correspondence. But he disclaimed them. Just as Zawahiri has disclaimed the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. It is a complete and total fabricated lie that al-Qaeda lives on and that it is the enemy. And it is people like Peter Bergen of CNN that promote that lie. And why does he promote it? Because that's what his news organization wants to communicate. That is what is popular amongst those infected with political correctness. Daniel put it succinctly, people are thinking this doesn't affect my country, but I'm telling you, this is just the Daniel they're quoting here is not a Daniel that you would know. It's a Daniel mentioned earlier in the article that we talked about yesterday that is just an average guy on the streets in Nigeria. People are thinking this doesn't affect my country, but I'm telling them terrorists didn't just wake up one morning and decide to become terrorists. He said, these guys, it takes years for them to decide to go out there and to commit these atrocities. So as the world, we have to come together and try to find a solution to this problem. You can't become a terrorist. There is no organization to join that says, okay, you are now a terrorist. There isn't some rite of passage where you go from being a non-terrorist to an affiliated terrorist to an apprentice terrorist to a full-fledged terrorist. Terrorism is a tactic. It has no agenda. It has no doctrine. It has no motivation. Terrorism doesn't exist as an organization, as an institution, or even as a problem. Terrorism is nothing but a tactic. It's a tactic that is as old as men and women have existed on this planet. Terrorism is the tactic of a very specific type of tactic whereby a religious, political, military, economic organization or ethnic group will choose, rather than fighting in the more traditional way, which is military against military or mano a mano, that they will take an armed paramilitary group or even a military group, and rather than attacking their foes' military or paramilitary, they attack their foes' civilian population. They attack the defenseless. And so terrorism is what happened, for example, in World War II, when the United States was sacrificing tens of thousands of Americans foolishly, island hopping. McNamara and May, two generals at the time, decided, I don't think McNamara was a general at the time, May certainly was, decided that, the United States could break the Japanese will to fight if the United States deployed terrorist tactics. So the United States began to firebomb Japanese cities. Not Japanese aircraft plants, not Japanese ball bearing plants, not Japanese naval shipyards, not Japanese troops, civilian population centers. And we did. Night after night, week after week, month after month, killing as many as 50,000 people in an evening, burning them alive. It's an act of terrorism. A tactic is terrorism. When Lincoln couldn't win the war of northern aggression against the southern states, he decided that there would be a tactic that would make war impossible to fight. And what you do is you realize you really can't occupy a country, as the North couldn't occupy the South. You just deplete your foe's willingness to fight. And that's what Sherman's March to the Sea was all about. It was an act of grotesque terrorism. So here's this fellow on the street in Nigeria talking about people are thinking that this doesn't affect my country, but I'm telling you, them terrorists, they're going to wake up one morning and decide to become terrorists. These guys, it takes years for them to decide to go out there and commit these atrocities. So the world, we need to come together and come up with a solution. Come on, folks. Wake up. Come on. Smell the roses. Take a deep breath. Open your eyes. Terrorism is a tactic. There is no such organization as a terrorist. There is no creed of a terrorist. Terrorists are found everywhere. There have been acts of terrorism since recorded history. Someone doesn't become a terrorist, they become a fundamentalist Muslim. They can become a jihadist. A jihadist has a definition. Someone who engages in warfare in Allah's name. They can become a mujahideen. They can become a fundamentalist Muslim who lives by the words and deeds of Muhammad. And by the way, it doesn't take very long. It doesn't take years. Someone exposed to the corrosive poison of Muhammad can be made into a monster in a matter of hours. Doesn't take years. And the solution to this problem is to shed our collective ignorance and to stop being so grotesquely irrational and grow up, get a backbone, stand up, and tell the truth. Expose and condemn the religion of Islam based upon its own scriptures. You don't have to make anything up. You don't have to cherry pick the worst from a sea of positives. Islam is vulnerable at its very core. Muhammad, Allah, the Quran, the Hadith, and the river of blood that has flowed out of these things. It is that simple. It is that important. The solution to the problem is to expose and condemn Islam and to hold the religion accountable. Are you willing to be part of the solution? Are you going to be like Daniel here? Are you going to be like Peter Bergen? Are you going to be like the idiot that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, who is a professor, the Muslim guy he calls himself, and be part of the merciless, sexist, and deadly plague that is the religion of Islam? The terrorists raided the girls' school in the middle of the night, posing as soldiers. After a gunfight with security guards, they stormed the students' dormitory and herded the girls into vehicles. Herded is the right term there, because these girls were nothing but domesticated animals from the Muslims' point of view. They herded them into the vehicles. These girls, by the way, the oldest of them was 15, the youngest around 12. They made their escape. The militants weren't as they made their escape. The militants. Now, they're not militants. They're jihadists. They're mujahideen. Now, Islam has words that define who these guys are. Burned down nearby buildings in the northern town of Chibok. The girls disappeared into the night. By the way, one of the trucks broke down. A bunch of girls actually escaped. And the community there in Nigeria, they didn't bother to respond. The police, they didn't bother to respond. The army, they didn't bother to respond. Why? Because everybody's in the dark. They're all in denial. Even worse are fears that what will happen to the girls next. A new video from the purported leader, Boko Haram, details his chilling plan. Quote, "I abducted your girls. I will sell them in the market by Allah," said the man claiming to be Boko Haram's leader, Abu Bakr Shekau. We talked about Abu Bakr in our program yesterday. Abu Bakr is the name of Islam's financier, the only man who had means in Mecca to promote Muhammad, and he did. And he endeared himself with Muhammad that when his little girl was 6 years old, he tossed his little 6-year-old girl on Muhammad's lap and then left the two of them in bed, closing the curtain, walking out of the tent when he was 50 years old. He sacrificed his own daughter on behalf of this despicable religion. That's who Abu Bakr is. That's why Islam has not changed in 1400 years. He said, yes, I abducted them and I will sell them in the market by Allah. The claim, if the claim proves true, the 276 teen girls could become child brides or sex slaves. What's the difference? What's the difference? What's the difference between a child bride and a sex slave? Any? These girls were kidnapped. They're captives. If you marry a captive to have sex with her, how is that any different than rape? Oh, is it prettier rape because you're calling her your wife? When you bought her because she was kidnapped and enslaved? The girls, of course, as the article says and affirms, that they are as young as 12, and the abductions are only getting worse. This from Reuters. The leader of Boko Haram on Monday threatened to sell more than 200 girls in his Islamist group kidnapped in northern Nigeria last month. Boko Haram militants stormed the all-girls school in the village of Chibok in the Borno state on April 14th and packed the teenagers who had been taking exams onto trucks and disappeared into the remote area along the border with Cameroon. By the way, these girls were Christians. They were Christians. Boko Haram is Islamic. The attack shocked Nigerians who have been growing accustomed to hearing about atrocities. Before I share the rest of that sentence. April 14th. What is it? Today is May 7th, right? May 7th? April 14th, May 7th? Yeah, that's what, 3 weeks? 3 weeks. What happened in the first few days, and then the first week, and then in the first few weeks when that Malaysian airplane disappeared from the skies and about 200 people disappeared? The whole world rallied, didn't they? The Chinese sent airplanes and ships. America sent airplanes and ships. The Australians dispatched airplanes and ships. Even the Vietnamese dispatched airplanes and ships, as did the Malaysians. The world was searching for these girls. The British and the French deployed their satellites, as did the Americans. The whole world was searching for a missing plane of some 200 people. Oh, they're on this program with Aaron. We used to constantly comment about how many stories there were about this missing plane. It was the Where's Waldo Today? I don't want to make light of the airplane. It's a tragedy. And yet 3 weeks ago, nearly 250 little girls were kidnapped. Christian girls kidnapped in Nigeria, pirated away by Muslim terrorists who are now threatening to sell them as sex slaves. And where's the world? Oh, yeah, yesterday the United States, we're going to try, we're going to send somebody down there. We're going to send somebody to our embassy down there. We're going to look for them for you. Yeah, we're going to be looking. No one else has done anything. What's wrong with us? Are we afraid that if we address this, we'll have to deal with the fact that Islam is barbaric? Is that why no one wants to touch it? What's wrong with us? This was over 3 weeks ago. The attack shocked Nigerians who have been growing accustomed to hearing about atrocities and an increasingly bloody 5-year-old Islamist insurgency in the north. Oh, it's not even an insurgency in the north. They already have Sharia law where they are. They just want to impose Sharia law on the rest of the country. Quote, I abducted your girls, and I will sell them in the market by Allah, Boko Haram leader Abu Bakr Shekau says in a video, chuckling as he stands in front of an armored personnel carrier with 2 masked militants wielding AK-47s on either side of him. Allah has instructed me to sell them. They are His property, and I will carry out His instructions, he said. Allah has instructed me to sell them. They are His property, and I will carry out His instructions, he said, standing before the armored personnel carrier with men on either side wearing masks and wielding AK-47s. He was telling the truth. He was telling the truth. That is, in fact, what the Quran says. That is what his God orders. We have Larry on the line, and also our friend Glenn. Let's begin with Larry. I'm not in a particularly happy mood today, Larry.
Well, I could tell that.
There's something that really bothers me about a religious organization that goes off and kidnaps, rapes, tortures, and then attempts to sell little girls when the world doesn't seem to care. Yeah,
well, what's more amazing than that is that you have the United Nations with their sights trained on Israel when this kind of stuff's going on, and we talk about invading countries because we want to advance freedom.
Yeah, wouldn't Israel be so much better off? Wouldn't it be so much better off in Israel, Larry, if Muslims under Sharia law took over most of that territory? If you had more area under Sharia law so that more little girls could be mutilated and tortured and raped, wouldn't that make the world a lovely place?
Well, that, every now and then, the boys will get a little rambunctious. That will become an embarrassment, so then you have to kill the girl.
They call that an honor death. Tens of thousands of them take place all around the world. We also have Glenn on the line, and we'll get Glenn's feedback. Because I want to tell you, folks, it is time that the rest of us get angry. If this does not cause you to hate the religion of Islam, then I dare say you become immoral. The militants who say they're fighting to reinstate medieval Islamic caliphate in northern Nigeria carried out a second bomb attack more than 2 weeks ago in the same area, killing 19 people and mutilating 34. By the way, it is impossible to establish a caliphate in northern Nigeria. By its very definition, the caliphate is worldwide. They are working as are the same Islamic jihadists in Syria and Iraq and in Egypt and throughout the Islamic world to establish a one-world government where the only religion is Islam. You cannot have a regional caliphate. Oh, now, for poor old Jonathan Goodluck, who's the president of Nigeria, they say that the girl's abduction has been hugely embarrassing for him, and it threatens to overshadow his first hosting of the World Economic Forum, which began today. Before we attack the Muslim guy, Arsalan Iftikhar, who is a professor of religious studies at DePaul University in Chicago. I'd like to hear what Glenn has to say. Oh, Glenn. Glenn? I see you on the line, but unfortunately...
I'm here.
Okay. All right. Glenn, feel free to chime in. You think I'm being a little rough on Islam here today?
Oh, no, not at all. It's just that I'm just thinking it's just kind of, you talked about how the world mobilized for the 200 plus missing people from the airliner.
Yes.
But there were also some prominent people and some technologies involved with that, and all that sort of thing. These are people, but they're lacking, and they don't have a multi-million-dollar aircraft to add interest or, especially talented computer people to add intrigue. So I guess it doesn't rate enough. But I think that I still say I would love to see, the nations love to deploy special forces troops for things. I can think of no better use for a multinational special forces task force with satellite imagery and night vision and infrared.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And this particular go in and just...
Yeah, but let me stop you. I would agree. had that been done on April 21st or April 22nd, when they would have to have been within a dilapidated truck ride on dirt roads of where they were abducted. Then, using satellite imagery, using reconnaissance drones, and using special forces to capture these girls would have been an outstanding use of the armed forces of any nation on this earth. That would have been wise. 3.5 weeks later, all you're doing is you're putting your troops in harm's way with an extraordinarily small chance of success. And you know, I have a problem deploying troops unless you're going to do so truthfully. You know, if you're going to deploy troops based on a lie, there is no cause worth fighting. Like Vietnam, where the Gulf of Tonkin incident did not occur. World War I, where we had so many of our sons die in trench warfare based upon the lie of the Lusitania. The Spanish-American War based upon the lie of the sinking of the Maine. The Afghanistan invasion based upon the lie of al-Qaeda. The invasion of Iraq based upon the lie of weapons of mass destruction. If you're going to send your troops into combat a foe, then the very least the leaders of that country can do is to tell the truth about that foe. And if they're not willing to do so, then I wouldn't even deploy troops, even on the 22nd day, because you're likely to do more harm than good when you don't explain what you're doing and why.
The eggs are no longer in one basket. They've had a chance to disseminate these women. They can use them as hostages and threaten one.
Every one of those girls has been raped.
Right.
Every one of them. Every one of those girls has been forced under torture to convert to Islam. They're all dispersed. It would, a raid now, you might free 10 of them. That would be good, but you ought not engage militaristically unless you're going to do so with full transparency, telling people why you're doing it, explaining who it is that you're going after. You don't have to give up the details of your mission, but at least explain the parameters for it.